Hello ladies and gentlemen, I'm Paul TX141 Walsh and welcome to some more Gran Turismo Sport, a racing game developed by Polyphony Digital and published by Sony Interactive Entertainment for the PlayStation 4. Focusing on the game's online mode and the sport mode, in this episode I take a look at my performance in the 9th race of the first stage of the 2019 Manufacturer Series season, which is a Group 4 race held at the Autodromo Nazionale Monza circuit. With that, let's get racing. Taking a look at the grid then, you'll see that I've qualified second with a 158.3. My story for qualifying, I was happy with my qualifying result. 4 tenths off a pole as scored by the Audi TT here, their 157.9 being an impressive lap. But I expected not to get pole and an Audi TT or a Ford Mustang to beat me, simply because I see Monza as a power circuit. Cars with high top end speed going down the extensive straights are going to have a net advantage in the long haul, and the Audi TT is one of the fastest cars in the straight line, if not the fastest, within the Group 4 category. So to qualify second, I was very happy with that because I was targeting to try and get as close to the front as possible and then try to overcome the speed deficit down the straights through using the slipstream of the guys in front. Now, very strategy wise, this was a sprint race. 8 laps start to finish, no pit stop required, no fuel saving required, but tyre wear would be a concern in that we were all expected to use the racing hard tyre, but on the last couple of laps, so laps 7 and 8, I found that the front left tyre in particular would start to give way, and that wear would mean that I could not be as aggressive through the 2 Lesmos, I turns 6 and 7, and also through the Ascari chicane, so turns 8 through to 10, where being too aggressive would lead to the car going sideways and compromising my line, if not causing me to cut turn 10 and pick up a potential penalty. So with that in mind, as we come down to the final quarter of this 20 car grid, always being B driver rating drivers, one other thing to take into account, this was a later slot than I expected to race in. This was the 11 o'clock at night slot. I did go into the 9 o'clock in the evening slot, but what I found was that when I went into that, a power cut happened in my local area, and that meant that I completely lost the ability to do the 9 o'clock slot and I had to wait for another 2 hours. So I was tired, I just wanted to go to bed, but I thought, you know what, let's get through this race, let's do our best and just go for it. Let's see where we can finish. And my target was to finish second or higher, try and maintain the same position that I started in at the minimum. So we're about to get underway, and whilst we've been waiting on the grid, you'll note that my fuel gauge is slightly off of 100%. I have been revving the engine out whilst we've been waiting, trying to get rid of as much fuel as possible to make the car as light as possible, so that way I can keep a little bit closer to the Audi in front and have just a little bit more speed coming down the straights. It's only going to be marginal, but it could make a difference in the long term. And as the rolling start procedure begins and we're about to get underway, you'll see immediately I'm going to be tucking in behind the Audi T2, who's just going to pull off in a straight line here. And watch how fast this Audi TT is in a straight line. They're not making any adjustments to their path down the straight here, and whilst I'm very gradually gaining on them through the slipstream, I'm not gaining an extensive rate compared to, say, the Porsche behind me, who's got the double toe effect of my car and the Audi. Now coming up into the braking zone for the initial chicane, turns 1 and 2, braking at the 150 board. We're going to get through here relatively cleanly, nice and tight behind the Audi, albeit I don't get on the throttle as early as I could have there, so I do fall back a little bit compared to the TT, but then it starts to equalise out what the benefit of the toe, and it looks as though the Porsche behind had to go a little bit defensive coming out of the initial chicane there, so we've been able to pull some distance from them, and they're no longer in the slipstream for the time being. But now as we're coming up to turns 4 and 5, the second chicane, coming into the braking zone, what we're going to see is I get a little bit deep on the brakes because of the slipstream effect, and I almost end up cutting turn 5, so I have to get off the throttle and make sure I don't cut the corner to pick up a 1 second penalty. And through getting through there cleanly, I do lose a bit of ground on the Audi TT, but I'm not too worried about it because I have one other factor to think about with regards to the Audi. Now whilst the Audi is a very fast car in the straight line, one has to consider it's a front engine front wheel drive vehicle, and it's going to be very harsh on its tyres as a result. With this track not having too many corners, but the majority of the corners here are all aggressive braking zones, particularly turn 1 and turn 4, where you've really got to stamp down hard on the brakes, and that's going to put a lot of wear through the front tyres on that Audi. And so we're looking in the region of laps 5 to lap 6, that Audi's tyres are going to be heavily worn compared to my own, and that means I'll be able to start gaining ground on them naturally over the race distance. Conversely, however, the guy behind is no slouch on tyre wear. The Porsche is very kind to its tyres compared to both the Audi and my own Honda NSX, so that's something to consider, that over the race distance, when my tyres start to fall off on laps 7 and 8, the Porsche's tyres will hold a little bit better unless they've been driving incredibly aggressively, and as a result of that it means that I start to fall into a bit of a disadvantage as we get towards the very end. And we can already see the chap behind, the German Porsche driver, is gaining quite rapidly despite falling back a bit as we went through the first half of lap 1, and now we're coming towards the end of the lap and moving on to lap 2. So this gap of 1.6 seconds between myself and the Audi I'm not too concerned about at the moment, because I'm out of their slipstream, so I'm not picking up the dirty air and having the consequences of potentially running very close to cutting corners as we saw on the first lap. But this is a very nice distance and a very nice position to be in, and I've just got to manage the gap for now and keep an eye on the Porsche behind, because I can be a bit more aggressive later on in the race when that Audi starts to fall off. And coming around Curva Grande here, so turn 3 once again, we'll see that we're just taking a very gradual line through the corner, nothing to worry about, not being too aggressive with the car right now. And this is something I did enjoy with the NSX around Monza, was the fact that if you got it right going through all the different corners here as we come up to the second chicanes, turns 4 and 5, you could naturally follow through the corners, and you have to be a little bit careful of your throttle usage coming out of the chicanes in particular, because if you went over those orange bumps with the throttle fully engaged and the steering misaligned from the centre point, that actually caused the rear of the car to jut out and could lead you to spinning off the track. So I made sure not to do that, made sure to keep the steering natural, not put too much aggressive input into the steering, and make sure to manage the throttle as we get a little bit sketchy there coming out to turn 7, the second Lesmo. And that's cost us a bit of time to the Audi in front, and it's cost us the ability to pull away from the Porsche behind, as they're now getting a bit closer as we come down the straight here towards the Ascari chicane for the second time. And we can see that gap's not quite slipstream range for the Porsche yet, but they are getting closer, and when we break into the Ascari chicane we can see that the Porsche behind has a much more aggressive and fast flying line through the Ascari chicane, which means they're now well within slipstream distance of my car as we're coming towards the end of lap number 2. And whilst they're not going to be able to make too much of an impact on this lap, one can imagine if they're able to hold this ground on my car now, as we go into lap number 3, they're going to be right up our backside. But the gap to the Audi in front isn't really extending at all, and it's not contracting, so this is a perfect situation. It's really, looking at the map in the top right corner of our screen, it's going to be a fight for first between 3 cars, myself, the Audi and the Porsche behind. Who prevails, we'll just have to wait and see, as we come across the line to begin lap number 3. And as we come down to the first corner, we can see that Porsche is well inside our slipstream zone now, getting closer and closer as we come down to the initial chicane, turns 1 and 2. We're not in a position to attack here, but they're starting to size us up a little bit, I would gather. We're going to get nice and clean through here, hopefully, so that way we pull a little bit away in the acceleration zone. Porsche gets a little bit wide coming out of turn 2 there, that gives us just a little bit of breathing room, albeit they're still within our slipstream radius, so as a result they're going to be able to pick up the toe, and they're going to be able to neutralise the disadvantage of their little mistake coming out to turn 2. Unfortunately, I don't have the slipstream of the TT in front, and perhaps someone could argue I should have stayed a bit closer to the TT, but remember, I've got to play this race tactically as we come through the second chicane here, and we can see that Porsche is really bearing down us, but we get a lovely throw through the second chicane coming out of turn 5 in particular, where the car just went smoothly over the orange bump, didn't cut the corner too much, and as we come through the first Lesmo here, we get it nice and on the outer curb coming out, and into the second Lesmo we'll try and do the same, nail this corner nicely. And as we do, we come out, and now we can go charging down the straight, and we can see we gained a little bit of time on the Audi T2, who perhaps didn't have the smoothest of runs out of turn 7, as we now switch to the replay camera, and we can see that Porsche is really close behind. They seem to love this second section of the track in particular, able to get a lot of speed out of the 2 Lesmos, as they're now on the attack as we come down to the Ascari chicane. They're not going to go for a move here, but we know that they're faster through the Ascari chicane, and you can see how close they are to the back of my car. And as we come out to turn 10 and going down this final stretch before Parabolica, we'll see that the Porsche is tucked in right behind, and we're going to make them go to the outside to go to the left of my car. I'm going to take the inside line going into Parabolica to see if I can force them to brake a little sooner than they want, so they come into the back of my car rather than go round. But here they go very late on the brakes compared to myself. Great move by them. They go round the outside. That Porsche's got some fantastic grip on those hard tyres. They just about keep it on the track, and now we're going to chase one another down towards the TT as we move on to the next lap. And what I thought thought here is, remember, the Porsche can now drag you along towards the TT. You don't have to worry too much about trying to fight the Porsche to get the place back right now. The fight is for first, not for second. Let's just gradually make our way up towards the TT. As you see, I just show the Porsche here, look, I could get down the inside of you, but I'm going to tuck back in behind you. Just let them know, look, I'm not going to give up the fight yet, but at the same time send a message. I don't want to fight right now. I want us to get closer to the guy in front. We don't want him to disappear off into the distance. I should say him or her, I don't know the gender of the driver. As we come around Curva Grande here, you can see that the Porsche is getting closer and closer to the TT. I'm 0.9 seconds off of the back of the Porsche right now, so I've fallen back a little bit, but again, I'm not out of fighting range right now. I'm just off of slipstream range, so that way I don't end up going too deep into the second chicane here, learning from my mistake on lap 1. And we can see that these guys, in their aggression to come through the corner, are both going to pick up a 1 second penalty, and this is quite an interesting situation because now, with the penalty zone being after the second Lesmo, so long as I'm able to keep close to these guys and not fall too far back, albeit the gap's now 1.2 seconds as we come out of the first Lesmo, I may be able to pick up first place off of the both of them as they serve their penalty. The zones are about to begin. So I'm coming out of this corner and I'm expecting them to both stay over to the left hand side, albeit they now start to move all over the place here. We can see that the Porsche tucks back in behind the Audi TT to pick up the slipstream, but I'm able to saunter past both of them, what with the straight line speed advantage thanks to not picking up the penalty. As we come charging into the Ascari chicane here, we're going to try and break away a little bit. And we see that the Porsche is being very aggressive through the chicane. The Audi's not as aggressive. While tyre wear starting to sink its way into the front of that car now. And the two of them are fighting coming out to turn 10 down the straight here towards Parabolica. And it looks as though the Porsche is able to just about get in front of the Audi TT. Despite the straight line speed advantage of the TT, they've been able to do it as we come into Parabolica here. And I'm not able to really make too much of them fighting in order to get away, while the gap still being half a second between myself and the Porsche. So as we come out of Parabolica then to end lap number 4 and go on to lap number 5, we'll see that the Porsche in particular is within my slipstream zone, and the Audi TT is just about in the periphery of the Porsche slipstream zone, so it's still a fight for first between all three of us. It's not a case that we're starting to break away. As I go to the right and then tuck back to the left here, trying to just reduce the amount of tow that the Porsche is getting, but watch how late on the brakes they go here into turn 1, and again that Porsche is very good on its tyres and its brakes. As we come into the initial chicane, they're just about able to make the move stick, and now as I tuck in behind them coming out of the chicane onto turn 2, now into Curva Grande, we're going to tuck in right behind the Porsche here. Do we consider fighting for it at this point? Well, it's going to be a little bit risky because we're going to have to go to the left hand side to get the initial inside line into the second chicane, but then we end up on the outside coming out to turn 5, so I decided, you know what, I'm just going to show my presence here, and I'm going to back off a little bit. I'm just going to lift off the throttle here as we come into the braking zone, and as I do, watch the TT comes charging down the left hand side here. I'm not sure exactly what happened, whether their car just desynced out of the game, or alternatively they just misbroke themselves, they broke too late, and as a result they had to swerve out the way of the back of my car. They would have sent me charging into the back of the Porsche, but whatever happened, that was a bit of a distraction unfortunately, and that's enabled the Porsche to get away coming down to the second chicane, and now the gap's up to 1.4 seconds. I'm no longer feeling the wonderful effect of the rear of that Porsche in their slipstream zone. Whereas the Audi has dropped back all the way to 6 seconds now and is fighting for third place against a Austrian driver. I'm not sure what they're driving, however. So now at this point I've got to try and get the gap back down to 0.8 seconds, so that way I pick up the slipstream of the Porsche in front. But here's the difficulty with this situation: as I go a little bit too deep into turn 8 then, that compromises my line through the Ascari chicane, and as we come out to turn 10 we can see that's cost us the ability to get a bit closer and cost us 1/10 of a second. It's marginal, but it adds up over the race distance. And the thing is, with that Porsche having the better tyre wear and the better brakes by the looks of things, it means that as we go deeper and deeper now, I'm going to lose the window for chasing the Porsche down. And we brake a little bit earlier than the Porsche here, and this is what I'm starting to realise as well. The driver in the Porsche in front really feels comfortable in that car compared to myself around the Monza circuit. They brake later than me, they're more aggressive through certain sections, particularly Ascari, and as a result I just haven't got the natural pace here to be able to close the gap up without them making a mistake, alternatively the benefit of the slipstream tow. So what's beginning right now is, you know, we're going to keep being aggressive. We'll see what we can do to try and get first back. But I've got to keep the pressure on the driver. I can't let them think, oh, I've won the race with 3 laps to go, as we're on lap number 6 right now. Instead, I still need to be in their rearview mirror, and I want to keep reminding them, look, you've still got a Honda NSX that wants to chase you down. I'm not out of this race yet. The fight for third and fourth is still ongoing. Well behind, it looks as though the Austrians got in front of the Frenchman in the Audi TT. But that might change a little bit later on. But the 7.2 second gap between myself and them tells me they're fighting. They're starting to fall off the natural race pace. As the Porsche gets a little bit skew-iffy coming out of second chicane compared to myself, I'm able to close the gap up to 1.2 seconds at this point. 1.1 seconds. Can we get a clean line through the Lesmos then in order to close the gap even more? Unfortunately not, as we go a little bit wide into the first Lesmo, and that means because we don't sync it up on the apex, the gap opens up by a tenth, and as we come through the second one here, it opens up by a further 2 tenths. That Porsche really knows how to go through the second Lesmo. Credit to them, great driver. And as we come down the straight here towards the Ascari chicane once again, that gap's just opened up enough, and I was aware of the fact that the Porsche was very strong through sectors 2 and 3 based on watching the driver behind me earlier on, so I expected all the work in order to close up on them would be through the first sector going into the second sector, i.e. the 2 chicanes and Curva Grande compared to their car. As we come through the Ascari chicane then and onto this final stretch before Parabolica, we can see that gap's now back out to 1.6 seconds effectively, and really it's going to be a case of trying to make up all that time again. But obviously we need to be that visible presence in their rearview mirror, so that way they don't become complacent, and if anything they'll be encouraged more to drive as fast as possible and potentially make a mistake. So as we come out of Parabolica here to begin lap number 7, I'm also keeping an eye on the bottom left hand corner of my screen looking at the tyre wear, and I'm starting to see that the front tyres are falling off a little bit. They're about 75% right now, the front left tyre being more heavily worn than the front right tyre, and the discrepancy between left and right is even more visible with the rear tyres, and this immediately told me as we come to lap 7, right, you've got to be careful now because tyre wear is going to be a factor going through the Lesmos in particular and the Ascari chicane, and we can't afford to be as aggressive with the car, as otherwise we could potentially make a major mistake and send ourselves all the way back to 3rd place, if not further down the grid, and we don't want to pick up a penalty. And that's something as well I really didn't want to do at this circuit, because Monza is a track where you can pick up a good number of penalties for the smallest of cuts, and they can be, as we've seen, a second, a couple of seconds, depending on exactly where you cut the circuit, and I wanted to get through this one cleanly. So we're coming to the second chicane, going to take my natural line through here. We can see the tyre wear starting to come and going a little bit deeper into the chicane, so as a result I can't get a straight as possible line through the chicane, and that cost me a bit of time to the Porsche once again. Now it's at 1.8 seconds, albeit the time keeps fluctuating. We did see at the starter lap it was in the region of 1.9 seconds, we brought it down to 1.8 now. It may expand a little bit coming out the second Lesmo, as is naturally expected. We go a little bit wide onto the outer curve there, but not too much in order to start spinning off the circuit, i.e. picking up some gravel on the left hand wheels. And as we come down the straight here against the Ascari, we can see the gaps now opening up to 2 seconds. It's very gradually open up, however, they're not quite out of the neck of the woods yet. We're going to follow them all the way to the end of the race. We're going to try and be that constant presence. I do want the chance to get first place if I can, but if I have to settle for second, I'm not going to give off the impression I've already started to do that. Although in the back of my mind at this point, from what I recall, I was starting to say to myself, you know, the gap's out to 2.1 seconds, be happy with second place. It's what you wanted at the end of the day. You wanted to finish where you started as a minimum, if not change for first. You did change for first a little bit over the course of this race, but the Porsche driver in front just naturally is the faster driver around this circuit today. As we come through here to begin the final lap, the gap's now opened up to 2.2 seconds. That tyre wear is really starting to take its toll. As we found with Parabolica there, we did start to drift a little bit further out, almost off of the circuit, keeping 2 wheels inside the track limits of course. And as we come down to the first chicane for the last time, you can see that gap is 2.2 seconds. The Porsche driver may be considering just taking their foot off the gas a little bit. Let's see if we can get a good line through here, coming through the turn 1, then turn 2, and get on the power a little bit sideways with the rear end, but it doesn't cost us too much time. We'll pull that gap down to 1.9 seconds, so 3 tenths off there coming out the first chicane. Can we do the same job going through the second chicane? Can we get one final fight in as the gap between ourselves and the guys behind expands up to 9.4 seconds at this point? Let's see, coming down to the second chicane then, hitting the braking point just before the 100 board, coming down to second gear, getting a purple sector there, and going very sideways unfortunately coming out of the chicane, albeit not costing us too much time. Looks as though the Porsche was a bit more conservative coming through the chicane, so we gained another 2 tenths, and here we're very aggressive through Lesmo 1. Unfortunately, tyre wear is going to make us pay for it, as we take a very brief trip off the track and onto the gravel and the grass, but it doesn't cost us too much time. But at this point I said to myself, right, cool it down. That's it, that's the challenge over, let's just bring it home at this point. There's no way we're catching this, guys. The gap goes out to 2.2 seconds and the challenge, the fight, it's completely over. The gap to the guys behind is 10 seconds, you can let that close up a little bit if you want, don't worry about them, just get the NSX home in second place. We've done what we can. And we can see that breaking down into the Ascari chicane, we get a nice clean line through initially, but we get on the power too much, and tyre wear almost causes us to cut turn 10 and pick up what would have been a half-second penalty, if not a full second penalty. We don't want that at the end of the race. So down the final stretch here towards Parabolica, let's see if we can line it up nicely on the braking zone at the 100 board. and then just go into the final corner, enjoy the car as it comes through the corner here, feeling the momentum shift over to the left hand side as we come out of Parabolica, getting on the throttle gradually, not too hard at first compared to our initial laps due to the tyre wear effect, and we come down the final stretch here to finish the race in a comfortable second place. Having had time to reflect, I was very happy with the final results of this race, in that I truly feel it reflected the relative pace of myself, the Porsche and the Audi driver. On top of that, it was a tiring race, not only for the wheels of the car where that tyre wear was becoming a considerable factor coming into the final 2 laps, but also for me as the driver, in that it was an 11 o'clock slot race, not my standard 9 o'clock slot due to a local power cut, which cost me the ability to do the 9 o'clock race. And so when this race ended, I immediately said to myself, right, log off, turn off, just go get some sleep. Put this race behind you and then move on. But then, after a bit of time, started to think to myself, actually, I can't feel bad about this race. It was a good result, and if anything, it gives me the momentum to move on to the 10th race and thereby the final race of Stage 1 at the Sardinia Road Track B circuit on Saturday the 27th of July 2019. And with that, thank you for watching. If you did enjoy this video, be sure to leave a like, comment or subscribe for future episodes. As always, I've been TX141, and until next time, take care and drive safely.